The letter was sitting on the table between us. 8 pages. Cream paper. The notary seal pressed into the bottom right corner. Deep, raised, permanent. The ink was dark blue, not black. I kept looking at it when I couldn't look at her face. She was crying. I was not. She pushed the paper toward me like it was something she was surrendering. She said, "You were never really mine." I said, "I know." The room went quiet in a way rooms don't usually go quiet. Not silence. Something heavier than silence. The air had weight. The kind you feel in your chest when something has finally been said out loud that everyone knew and no one said. She was waiting for me to fall apart. I didn't. Because I had been ready for this moment for 11 months. And the proof in my bag was more than she could explain. Before I tell you what happened next, please take a moment to like and subscribe. Drop your city and local time in the comments. I love knowing where you are right now. Now, let me take you back to where this all started. My grandmother's kitchen smelled like cardamom and something older. Warm wood, maybe. Or the particular smell of a house that had been loved in the same way for 40 years. Some houses hold warmth like a material. Like the walls absorbed every meal, every winter morning, every person who ever sat down and felt safe. Her house was like that. You could feel it the moment you stepped through the front door. She kept a tin on the third shelf above the stove, pale blue. The paint had chipped at the corner, so the silver underneath showed through like a secret. Inside were the shortbread cookies she made on Sunday mornings. Not sweet exactly. More buttery than sweet. Dense and a little crumbly at the edges. She would set 2 on a small white saucer and hand them to me without asking if I wanted them. Because she already knew. She always already knew. Her hands were small. That's what I remember most. The smallness of them. The way she could hold my entire hand in one of hers and still have room. She had raised 4 children, planted a garden every spring for 30 years, and driven herself to every appointment until she was 81. Those hands had done everything. They felt like that when they held yours. Like something that had done everything and was still steady. I spent more time in that house than I spent in my own childhood home. This was not accidental. "You are mine," she told me once. I was 7, sitting exactly where I always sat. The chair closest to the window, the one that got the morning light. She was not looking at me when she said it. She was looking at the tin, opening it, and counting the cookies. But the words landed on me fully. Not as a declaration, more like an answer to a question no one had asked out loud yet. I didn't understand what she meant then. I do now. My mother, the woman I called mother, the woman who signed my school forms and appeared in my photographs, was different in every room she entered. There was a way she moved through spaces that I learned to read early. She would look at things the way a person looks at an inventory. Table, lamp, window, value, value, value. She would touch my grandmother's possessions with a particular kind of attention. Not affection. Assessment. She was polite. That was the difficult thing. She was always polite. Once, when I was 9, she left a folded paper on my grandmother's kitchen counter. A real estate agent's name was printed at the top. Below it, a handwritten note I couldn't fully read, but I saw numbers. I asked my grandmother about it later that afternoon. She picked it up without reading it and put it in the trash. Then she walked to the sink and washed her hands. Carefully. With soap. She didn't say anything about it. But before she turned off the tap, she looked at me over her shoulder. Just once. The way adults look at children when they want to say something and decide the child isn't old enough yet. Looking back, no, there were signs. The way my mother laughed at my grandmother's stories. Not unkindly. Just slightly delayed, like she was calculating the correct expression. The way she called me by a nickname no one else used. Not warm, just separating, like a way of saying this one is mine, not yours. The way she never once touched that pale blue tin. My grandmother has owned the house since 1971. 3 bedrooms. A garden in the back with tomatoes every summer and one old apple tree that leaned slightly north. The neighbors had known her name for 37 years. She had outlived 2 of them. She told me once at that same kitchen table that someday the house would be there for me. Not given, she said. Her voice was careful when she said it. Already yours. I was 11. I didn't ask her to explain the difference between those 2 things. I should have asked. I was 26 when I found the file. Not a file exactly. A folder. The beige expanding kind with the elastic band around it, the type you find in the back of a filing cabinet that no one has opened in years. It was in a box my mother had asked me to collect from a storage unit she was clearing out. She said it was some old paperwork. She said it wasn't anything important. Inside the folder was a document from the County Department of Records. My name was at the top, typed in a font I didn't recognize from any paper I had ever signed. Below my name was a case notation, a classification I had to read 3 times before my hands understood what my eyes already knew. The birth record did not list my mother as my biological parent. It listed someone else entirely, someone whose name I had heard once. Years ago, in a conversation I wasn't supposed to be part of. I did not call anyone that night. I sat at my kitchen table with the folder open in front of me and the overhead light slightly too bright. I kept reaching for a lamp that wasn't there. I made tea. I didn't drink it. I watched the steam stop. I started with the terminology. Adoption, legal guardianship, informal placement, biological parentage. I read every definition carefully because the language mattered. The legal language determined everything: rights, standing, inheritance, contestability. I was not reading out of grief. I was reading the way you read a problem you were going to have to solve. That wasn't the worst part. The worst part came 3 days later. I called the county records office on my lunch break. I stood outside the building in 14-degree wind, back against the wall, voice completely flat. I told the clerk I needed a copy of my original birth certificate, not the amended one. The original. She put me on hold for 4 minutes. Then she came back and read me 2 names. The first name was someone I didn't recognize. The woman named in that document from the storage folder. My biological mother, apparently, a name I had heard once and filed away without knowing why. The second name was my grandmother's. Not as the homeowner, not as the grandmother, as the mother on record. I stood completely still. The wind moved around me. My coffee had gone cold. I stayed there for another 3 minutes after the call ended, looking at nothing. I should have seen it sooner. 2 calls in the following week. The first was to a paralegal I had met briefly at a work event. She was sharp and practical and owed me nothing, but she answered on the second ring. I explained what I had found the same way I would explain a technical problem at work. Sequential, no emotion, just facts. She listened without interrupting. Then she said, "Pull the original deed on the property." I did. The house had been placed in a revocable trust in 2003, when I was 8 years old. The trust document named one sole beneficiary, my full legal name. My grandmother had structured it with her attorney so that the property transferred directly to the trust upon her death, bypassing the estate process entirely. My mother had been filing paperwork for 4 years to have herself named administrator of my grandmother's estate. She had told 3 family members, 2 neighbors, and my grandmother's own doctor that I had signed a release, a document relinquishing my inheritance rights in exchange for a lump sum payment. I had signed no such document. He, meaning the attorney my mother had hired to push this through, just didn't know it yet. Didn't know that the trust was already sealed. That it didn't require my signature to hold. That my grandmother had closed the door before he was ever hired to open it. The paralegal called on a Thursday afternoon. She had pulled the estate filing that my mother submitted to the probate court. It was 43 pages. Standard language throughout, correctly formatted, notarized at the bottom of every relevant section. Except for one paragraph near the end, a signature. My grandmother's signature. Scanned, repositioned, and placed onto a document dated 16 months after my grandmother had been admitted to memory care. 16 months later, she could no longer reliably sign her own name. 16 months after her neurologist had documented in her medical file that she lacked the cognitive capacity to execute legal instruments. The ink was dark blue. It was not the same signature. The letter formation was wrong. The pressure was wrong. The spacing between the letters of her name, which I had seen on 100 birthday cards, on the back of photographs, on the letter she left me, was wrong in a way that was subtle enough to miss in one reading and impossible to unsee in a second. I did not call my mother. I want to be completely clear about that decision. I understood exactly what had been done, and I chose, carefully, to be silent. Not because I was afraid, because silence was the correct strategy. Every action I took from that moment had to be documented and deliberate. The moment I made contact, I would change the shape of what was happening. So I said nothing, and I worked. The paralegal connected me to an elder law attorney. His office was small. 1 window, 2 chairs, a wall of bookshelves with nothing decorative on them. He reviewed the documents for 22 minutes in front of me. When he finished, he put the papers down in a neat stack and said, "This constitutes fraud against a protected adult." The signature is forensically contestable. We have clear standing. He said it the way a person says something they have explained many times. Plainly. Without drama. I said, "What do I need from you right now?" He said, "Nothing yet. Let them finish building it." More documentation is more evidence. I spent the next 6 weeks doing everything normally. I went to work. I answered ordinary emails. I made dinner. Once a week, I drove to see Mrs. Adair. My grandmother's neighbor for 31 years, 81 years old, the kind of woman who remembered everything and needed no encouragement to share it. She remembered the day my grandmother had met with her attorney to finalize the trust. She remembered the name of the notary. She remembered what my grandmother had said that afternoon when she came home. She had knocked on Mrs. Adair's door and said, "It's done. He doesn't know yet, but it's done." Mrs. Adair told me this over tea at her kitchen table, the same way she told everything. Steadily, without ornamentation. Then she stopped and looked at me and said, "Are you all right, dear?" I said, "Yes." She nodded once. She didn't press. My mother called twice that week. The first call was about the holidays. Casual, warm even, the version of herself she performed for phone calls. The second call was different. She mentioned, gently, that there were some documents related to the estate that would be helpful for me to review. Just formalities. The kind of thing that was easier to handle quickly, so that everyone could move forward without it hanging over the family. I told her I was in the middle of something at work. She pressed slightly. 2 sentences. Then, "I just don't want this to become complicated." I said, "I understand." Then I ended the call. Have you ever had to stay silent to protect yourself when every part of you wanted to speak? Tell me in the comments. I read them all. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please hit that button right now. Because this story is about to turn completely. My uncle called in the 4th week. He is my mother's older brother, a measured man, usually. He said he was calling because the family was concerned, that everyone wanted to be on the same page, that there was a potential buyer for the house and it would be better for everyone, including me, if the estate was settled before the market shifted. He mentioned a number, $347,000. There would be something in it for you, of course, he said. I asked what amount he had in mind. He paused. Just long enough, then $15,000. To make things clean. I said, "That's very specific." He said, "We want to be fair, that's all." I said, "I'll think about it." The attorney had already valued the trust at $412,000. The house had been appraised at $389,000 the previous spring by a licensed appraiser whose name was on file. They had already chosen a buyer. I understood that by the precision of the number. $15,000 was not a negotiating position. It was a figure someone had already calculated and agreed to. That same week, I collected the one physical item I was authorized to retrieve from my grandmother's house as her name next of kin. A small mahogany box, brass hinges, the size of a hardcover book. She had given me the key years before. On a thin chain she had worn around her own neck for as long as I could remember. I hadn't known what it opened until after she was gone. I opened it at my kitchen table at 11 o'clock at night. Inside, an unsealed envelope. Inside the envelope, a handwritten letter in my grandmother's hand. Small letters, tilted slightly right, the way she always wrote. And beneath the letter, a folded legal document. A statutory declaration, formally prepared and notarized in 2019 by her attorney, confirming my biological parentage, signed by my grandmother. Witnessed by 2 individuals whose names I recognized. One of them was Mrs. Adair. And below the declaration, in her handwriting, on a single index card, I knew they would try. I made sure they couldn't. She was building something I couldn't see. She had been building it for years. What do you think happened next? Option A. The estate case was settled privately out of court. Option B. Criminal charges were filed against those involved. Option C. The family agreed to return everything. Drop your answer in the comments below. I want to see what you think. The night before the attorney filed the complaint, I drove to my grandmother's house. I still had a key. I had always had a key. The electricity had been switched to a holding account. I used my phone light. Walked through the front hallway, past the coat rack where her winter coat had been for 40 years, into the kitchen. It smelled the same. Cardamom and warm wood and something else that had no name. Just the particular smell of her. I don't know how that was possible. 8 months empty. But it was still there. I looked for the tin on the third shelf. It was gone. I didn't search for it. I stood in the kitchen for a moment and looked at the empty shelf, and then I sat down in my chair. The one closest to the window, the one that got the morning light. And I put my bag on the table. The tears came without warning, not a collapse, not the dramatic kind. A quiet overflow, the kind that arrives before you know it's coming. That moves through you like something finally releasing pressure it had been holding for a long time. I let them happen. I didn't wipe them immediately. I let them finish on their own. Then I opened my bag. The trust documents, certified copies, are organized by date. The estate filing with the fraudulent signature is flagged in yellow. The statutory declaration from the mahogany box, the index card in her handwriting tucked carefully behind it. The forensic handwriting analysis the attorney had commissioned was 8 pages with unambiguous conclusions. I set them on the table. I looked at them for a long time. They were her work, really, not mine. She had done the building. I had only picked up what she left. Then I put everything back in order, closed the bag, turned off my phone light, and drove home. If someone you loved ever prepared something to protect you, even after they were gone, I want to hear about it. Tell me in the comments. Now let me tell you what happened the next morning. 8:03 a.m. I made 1 cup of coffee. I dressed the way I dress for any other Tuesday. I drove to work, parked, and sat in the car for 4 minutes. 8:47 a.m. The attorney filed the complaint with the probate court. Simultaneously, a referral was forwarded to the county district attorney's financial crimes unit. The referral included the forensic handwriting analysis, the original trust document, the fraudulent estate filing, and the 2019 statutory declaration. 9:07 a.m. my mother's attorney called her. I know this because she told me later. She said she was in her kitchen. She said she was having breakfast. She said the call lasted 11 minutes and she couldn't remember most of what was said. 9:22 a.m. my phone rang. My mother. She was not crying when she started speaking. She was using the careful version of herself. Measured, controlled, the inventory voice. She said there had been a misunderstanding. She said the document had been prepared by someone else, and she hadn't fully understood what she was authorizing. I waited until she finished. Then I said, "The statutory declaration my grandmother filed in 2019 confirms my legal parentage and is notarized by 2 witnesses. The trust cannot be contested under the terms she established. The signature on the estate filing has been referred to the district attorney's financial crimes unit for review." She said, "I'm your mother." I said, "I know what the records say." There was a pause. Long enough that I checked my phone to confirm the call was still connected. What I did not say, "I'm not angry at you." I didn't say it because it wasn't relevant to the call. It was true. I was not angry, not in the way she expected, not in the way that would have given her something to respond to. But saying it would have shifted the conversation to her feelings. That wasn't what the call was. The call was a notification. At 9:44 a.m., the state attorney my uncle had retained withdrew from the case. By 10:15 a.m., the prospective buyer had been contacted by his own attorney. By 11 a.m., 3 family members had called my phone. I let them go to voicemail. 11:34 a.m. "Mrs. Adair." I answered on the first ring. She said, "Did it hold?" I said it held. She said, "Good." That was the whole call. The consequences fell like dominoes. Each one made a sound. The district attorney's office opened a formal inquiry into the estate filing within 11 days. They contacted the notary whose stamp appeared on the fraudulent document, a licensed notary who had been practicing for 19 years. Her license was placed under review within 3 weeks. She had a statement prepared by her own attorney. I was not privy to its contents, but I understood from mine that she claimed to have been misled about what she was certifying. The family attorney who had assisted with the filing was named in the referral. His office did not respond to the inquiry. My uncle called once, not to apologize. He called to ask whether there was any way to reduce the professional exposure for the notary. He said she had children. He said her career didn't deserve to be destroyed over a misunderstanding. I said, "That isn't something I have any authority over." He said she has children. I said, "I understand." He said nothing after that and ended the call. The paralegal assembled the complete evidence file. Text messages between my uncle and the real estate agent, time-stamped, discussing the timeline for clearing the estate. Screenshots from a group message in which the plan was outlined. The language was careful, but the meaning was not ambiguous. a PDF comparing the fraudulent estate filing against the certified trust documents side by side. A printed copy of the 2019 declaration with the notary certification intact, next to the medical records documenting my grandmother's cognitive state in the months during which the fraudulent signature was supposedly obtained. The real estate transaction collapsed. The buyer withdrew within 48 hours of being informed of the pending legal proceedings. His agent sent a single sentence by email. The house remained in the trust, in my name. 14 weeks after the filing, a woman named Diane, a neighbor from my grandmother's street whom I had met perhaps twice, sent me a message through mutual contact. She said she had been thinking about whether to reach out for a long time. She said my grandmother had told her, years before she got sick, that she was making arrangements to protect me. She said my grandmother had been very calm about it. She said, she told me, he doesn't know yet, but he will. And by the time he needs it, it will already be there. I read the message twice. Then I made dinner. Pasta. Nothing complicated. I stood at the stove and stirred it and didn't think about anything in particular. That was the night I understood that she had planned for the exact version of events that actually happened. My mother called 4 months later. It was a Sunday morning. She asked if we could meet somewhere. Not her house, not anywhere significant. Just somewhere ordinary. I said yes. I chose a restaurant neither of us had any history with. A booth by the window. The sun came through at an angle that softened everything. She ordered tea. I ordered coffee. We sat for a moment without speaking. She did not make excuses. That surprised me more than anything else that had happened. She said, I wanted things that weren't mine. I said, I know. She said, I don't know how to fix it. I said, I don't need you to. She looked at the table. Not ashamed, exactly. More like someone sitting with the weight of what they had done without anywhere to put it down. I recognized the posture. I had seen it in myself in the months before I filed. We sat together for another 40 minutes. We talked about small things. My work, the weather that week, a show she had been watching. Nothing significant, but we stayed. I didn't tell her about the tin. I had found it eventually in a cardboard box in my uncle's garage. Still sealed in the packing tape he had used when he cleared out the house. The pale blue tin with the chipped corner. I took it without telling him. I washed it at my own sink when I got home, set it on my counter, and stood there looking at it for a while. It still smelled like her kitchen. I don't know how. My father, her husband, the man who had been silent throughout all of it, called 2 weeks after that Sunday. The conversation was shorter and harder, more structural. He said he acknowledged what had taken place. He said the family would not pursue any further action related to the property. He did not use the word sorry, and I did not expect him to. I said thank you. I meant it in the limited way it was intended. My younger sister called in the 6th month. That conversation was unfinished. Honest. Cautious in the way that conversations are when two people are building something fragile. We talked for 40 minutes and ended it the way you end something that isn't over. With a door left open. Some things take longer. Some things stay incomplete. That's allowed. The mahogany box sits on my desk now. I keep my keys in it. The brass hinges have started to tarnish slightly at one corner. I haven't polished it. People ask me what it felt like to win. I don't use that word. Winning implies a competition. That there were two sides, and one of them defeated the other. But what there was really was a promise. My grandmother made a promise to a child at her kitchen table. She made it quietly in increments, over 15 years, with legal documents and notary stamps and a handwritten note in a sealed envelope in a mahogany box she knew I would eventually open. She didn't tell me she was building it because she didn't want me to spend my childhood understanding why it was necessary. That is love. Not the warm, performed kind, the architectural kind. The kind that plans for your future without asking you to participate. The kind that holds weight after the person is gone. I have thought about what I believed family meant. The word itself, how heavy it sat for so long. How I worked to deserve a place in a story that I didn't know I had already been written into. How I watched my grandmother hand me 2 cookies on a saucer and thought it was ordinary. It was not ordinary. It was her answer to every question she had already seen coming. I didn't get revenge. Revenge would have required me to hurt someone. What happened instead was that a trust was held. Those documents filed by a careful old woman in 2003 did exactly what they were designed to do. A forensic signature analysis proved what her handwriting already said. That a statutory declaration written in 2019, when she still knew exactly what she was doing, said my name clearly and left no ambiguity for anyone to exploit. She made sure. I kept a promise. And for the first time. Standing in a house on a quiet street where the neighbors knew my name, where the back garden still had one apple tree that leaned slightly north, where the third shelf above the stove still held the shape of something that used to be there. I was standing somewhere that belonged to me. The cardamom smell is still in the walls. I don't know how, but it is. Has someone ever protected you in a way you only understood much later? Tell me in the comments. It doesn't have to be long. One sentence is enough. I read every single one. If this story reached you today, please subscribe and turn on notifications. I put real time into every one of these, and it means something to me that you're here. Check the description for more stories like this. I'll see you tomorrow.